Hey guys, tonight we're going back to a time when powdered wigs were cool, muskets took a full minute to reload, and itchy wool was considered battle gear. That's right, grab your bayonet and your least comfortable shoes, because you've just enlisted as a British Redcoat in the American Revolutionary War. Picture this, it's 1775, and you're standing stiff in your brand new scarlet uniform under a grey London sky. The air smells faintly of coal smoke and wet cobblestones. You're 17, maybe 18, depending on how generous the recruiter was feeling with the paperwork. The officer told you it'd be glorious, adventure, respect, a decent wage, and besides, it's just some little colonial uprising, not a real war. How bad could it be? Well, buckle up, because you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your city and local time in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand in line with the other new recruits, sweating under a too-tight collar, while a sergeant with half his teeth barks out the rules of soldiering. Rule number 1, shut up and march. Rule number 2, don't die before payday. You laugh. The guy next to you doesn't. He already looks like he's regretting life. You think you're joining the world's most disciplined army. You've heard the songs, the glory, the victories, the empire on which the sun never sets, except no one mentions the small print that you'll be living 5 men to a tent, eating biscuit-hard bread, and treating dysentery with a rusty spoon and divine intervention. Your training is rushed. 2 weeks of drilling in a muddy field, learning how to form a line, fire, and reload a musket slower than it takes to boil cabbage. You learn to march in formation, shoulder arms, and wear that ridiculous tricorn hat without letting it fall over your eyes. That's about it. No one really prepares you for the part where the enemy actually shoots back. Your commanding officer is a nobleman's son who's never seen a battlefield, but he speaks Latin and owns horses, so that's enough for the army. You salute him because he's got better boots, even though his only skill appears to be shouting your last name incorrectly. Soon, word arrives that you're shipping out. The rebellion in the colonies is escalating. Boston's a mess. The king needs boots on the ground, and guess what? You're the boots. You leave behind everything, family, the local tavern, that girl who might have liked you, or might have liked you, or might have liked you, or might have just liked your uniform. You'll never know. They don't give you much time to say goodbye. They don't want you thinking too hard about whether you actually want to go. The journey to the docks is full of songs, sarcasm, and the kind of grim cheer that only comes when everyone's too afraid to admit what's ahead. You pass through towns where people cheer, kind of. Mostly they just stare. Some boo. England's getting tired of war. Another expedition, more taxes, and now even the colonies are revolting. You're part of something big, but you're also just a kid in a borrowed coat. At the harbor, you board a creaking transport ship with too many men and not nearly enough buckets. The moment you step below deck, the smell hits you, salt, sweat, wet timber, and the slow, ominous churn of stomachs realizing they don't like the Atlantic. A few hours in, you realize that rats have claimed half the ship before you even set sail. One of them blinks at you from your hammock. You blink back. He wins. The voyage takes weeks. The sea is violent and endless. You throw up more than you eat. One guy breaks his arm falling down the ladder during a storm. Another just disappears one night, fell overboard maybe, or got pushed. Historians still argue whether discipline on British ships was harsh necessity or outright cruelty. You vote for cruelty. You get one hot meal every couple of days if the cook isn't sick. The biscuits are hard enough to chip teeth, and the salted beef is so old it might actually be from the last war. The water goes stale after week 2. You start dreaming about oranges. Someone says if you eat a rat, you won't get scurvy. You believe them for a few minutes. That's where you are now. But worse than the food, the smell, or even the storms, is the waiting. Endless water, endless grey, and the growing knowledge that no one's exactly thrilled you're coming. When land finally appears, low and pine-covered in the distance, you're more relieved than excited. You've arrived in America, the rebellious colonies, land of liberty, muskets, and way too many trees. Your boots hit Boston soil, and instantly you know, they hate you here. Children throw rocks. Tavern signs vanish as you walk past. Locals mutter lobsterbacks under their breath, a slur for your red uniform. Some shout it right to your face. You were told you'd be welcomed as a hero, but you feel more like an occupying pest. There's no battle yet, just tension. Like walking into a room where someone was just arguing, and now everyone's pretending it didn't happen, but their eyes say otherwise. The colonial militias are training in secret. The Sons of Liberty are busy stirring up every pot they can find. You're not fighting yet, but you're definitely not safe. You sleep in crowded barracks with lice and whispers of ambushes. You're warned not to go out alone. One soldier doesn't listen. He ends up beaten, stripped, and dumped in a pig pen. Another disappears entirely. He probably deserted, says your officer. Or maybe the locals just got tired of waiting. The streets of Boston look normal enough. Church steeples, cobbled alleys, fish markets. But there's a tension that hums in the air. Every step you take, someone's watching. Every move feels rehearsed. You start to dream of home, of the muddy fields and familiar fog, of your mother's stewed potatoes and the girl with the crooked smile. But that's all far away now. And whether you meant to or not, you're in this. And something tells you the real trouble hasn't even started yet. Your boots sink into the cold, muddy soil of the Massachusetts coast as you haul your gear off the ship. It's early morning, but there's no sun, just a slate sky and a breeze that smells like fish, smoke, and the future collapsing in slow motion. Welcome to America. Land of the free, home of the deeply annoyed. You're marched inland without ceremony. No band, no flags. Just the rhythmic squelch of 100 boots trudging through mud and whatever that mysterious squish was back there. The town you're entering, Boston, is already awake, but no one's smiling. Shopkeepers glare. A kid spits at your feet. A dog barks like it knows something you don't. Your barracks aren't finished yet, so you're quartered in some local homes. That sounds charming until you realize these homes are not volunteering. Families are forced to host you by law. They hate you. And they're not subtle about it. Every bite of their stale bread comes with a side of cold silence. One old woman stares at you so intensely during breakfast, you start checking your porridge for glass shards. This is your new normal. You've crossed an ocean for king and country, and now you're sleeping on a stranger's floor, dodging eye contact while trying to stitch up your socks with borrowed twine. You don't get time to adjust. Your officer, still mispronouncing your name, has you up at dawn, drilling in tight formation on damp grass while colonists watch from porches. They whisper, smirk, sometimes point. You hear things like lobsterback, bloody tyrant, and once just cockroach. You're not sure that one was political, but it still hurts. Then the letters start to arrive. From home, mostly. News of your brother joining a factory, your neighbor marrying your girl, your cousin dying of something called milk leg, which somehow sounds both made up and horrifying. But the worst part, the letters take months to get here, if they arrive at all. By the time you read them, everything's already changed. You're chasing ghosts, and the ghosts are winning. At least you have your friends, sort of. The lads you sailed with are still around, most of them. Thomas from Liverpool won't stop coughing. Jenkins from Devon swears he saw a ghost in the well. And Miller? He fell in love with a tavern girl and got stabbed by her brother. Twice. He's fine. Just walks with a limp now. Says it adds character. You don't ask too many questions anymore. Your days settle into a grim rhythm. Drill, eat, patrol. Try not to die of boredom or dysentery. The city smells worse the longer you stay. Garbage piles up, rats get bold, and your boots never seem to dry. You dream of clean socks the way poets dream of lost love. The Redcoat life, it turns out, is less empire of glory and more public enemy with foot fungus. Then come the riots. It starts small. Rocks thrown at patrols, windows broken near garrisons, rumors of mobs forming. But it builds fast. A group of colonists corners one of your patrols and starts hurling insults. One throws snow, then ice, then a club. You don't remember who fires the first shot, but suddenly it's chaos, screaming, smoke. A boy lies bleeding in the snow. This will later be called the Boston Massacre. You're told not to worry, it was just a misunderstanding. But the way people look at you now, it's different. More than hate. There's purpose behind their stares. You're not just a soldier anymore. You're a symbol, a warning, a spark waiting to catch. Historians still argue whether events like this were spontaneous or part of a larger revolutionary strategy. But you don't care. All you know is that you're no longer safe, even in uniform. You're relocated to a tent camp outside town, just far enough away to make the locals feel safe, and just close enough that they can still sneak in and steal your rations at night. Security is a joke. Half the sentries fall asleep at their posts. The other half are too drunk to notice when the gunpowder goes missing. Ah yes, the gunpowder. One morning, you wake to the sound of shouting. You roll out of your blanket, wet again, and grab your musket. Your sergeant yells something about missing supplies. A colonial militia snuck into one of the storage houses and made off with barrels of powder. Just walked right in. The guards say they were distracted. You say they were idiots. You're ordered to investigate. You and 10 other redcoats are sent to a nearby village to encourage cooperation. You march in like you're still in control. But everyone's gone silent. Even the dogs are quiet. Something's changed. You knock on doors, ask questions, get nothing but blank stares and the occasional muttered tyrant. Then a cart of manure tips over right in front of you. Accident, they say. Sure. Right. You return empty-handed and covered in fertilizer. Back at camp, the rumor is that General Gage is losing control. Even he knows this rebellion isn't going away. And soon, very soon, you'll be fighting an enemy who's done pretending to be afraid. Then the orders come in. Reinforcements are on the way, yes, but so is war. Your first real mission is to march on Concord and seize more colonial weapons. You're told it's simple, a show of force. No real resistance expected. Of course, that's not how it goes. As you prepare for the mission, you hear whispers of colonial riders galloping through the night. Lanterns flickering in church towers, men gathering in barns with guns and grim faces. The colonies aren't waiting anymore. And you're heading straight into the hornet's nest. But for now, the march begins at dawn. You try to sleep, but your tent is damp, your boots are soaked, and your thoughts won't stop spinning. Tomorrow could be your last day, or just another miserable one in a long line of disappointments. Either way, the mud isn't going anywhere, and neither are you. You don't even make it to Concord before the locals try to kill you. The march begins before sunrise, your regiment moving stiffly through cold mist and dew-soaked grass, every step squelching like some slow funeral procession. You were told this was just a precautionary sweep, a routine collection of hidden weapons from the rebels. But the moment you cross the quiet outskirts of Lexington, you know you've walked into something different. It's too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes your skin tighten. And then, out of the early fog, you see them. Farmers, shopkeepers, boys who haven't shaved and old men who probably shouldn't be standing, let alone holding muskets. But they are. Dozens of them, waiting in formation like they're the army now. Your officer steps forward, starts shouting legal declarations, colonial orders, words that worked in London drawing rooms but mean nothing here. And then, crack, a single shot. No one knows who fired it. Some say a nervous Colonial finger slipped. Others say one of your side panicked. Historians still argue whether it was an accident, a setup, or just the inevitable breaking point. But the effect is instant. Gunfire erupts from both sides. You barely raise your musket before the air is filled with smoke, noise, and screaming. You see one of your friends, Davies, the quiet one who liked birds, drop instantly. His body folds like paper. You stand frozen for a second too long before instinct kicks in, and you fire wildly into the haze. Within minutes, the field is chaos. The Colonials scatter, running through trees and past fences, firing as they flee. Your unit holds formation, barely. When the smoke clears, 8 Colonials are dead. Your officer calls it a success. Your stomach disagrees. You keep marching, numb, toward Concord. But Concord isn't any better. It's worse. The town is practically empty when you arrive. Most of the rebels have melted into the forest. You find some hidden gunpowder, sure. Burn a few barrels. But then the militia comes back. They don't fight fair. They don't line up and trade volleys like proper soldiers. They shoot from behind trees, from inside barns, from rooftops. You're in formation, in red, bright as a bloody target against the spring greenery. Every few steps, someone in your column drops with a thud and a scream. It's like walking through a meat grinder in slow motion. The retreat back to Boston is hell. Your column stretches for miles, slowly collapsing under fire from both sides of the road. You pass dead friends, broken carts, burning fences. Locals who once glared now cheer as you run. At one point, you trip in a ditch and barely scramble out before a musket ball buries itself in the mud beside your head. You were told the colonists would run at the sight of British steel. They didn't run. You returned to Boston, bloodied, shaken, and no longer under any illusion. This isn't a rebellion. It's a war. And you're not winning. From that moment on, everything changes. Boston becomes a fortress, surrounded by Colonial forces. You're trapped inside the city with dwindling supplies and growing fear. The smell of salt air mixes with the stench of unwashed bodies and the constant whisper of mutiny. You go out on patrols less and less. Too dangerous, too unpredictable. And when you do go out, it's always with bayonets fixed and eyes darting toward every rooftop. You even start to suspect your fellow Redcoats. Some of them disappear without a trace, and no one really asks questions anymore. Letters from home talk about rising taxes, about riots in London, about Parliament, debating whether this whole America thing is even worth it. You write back, telling your mother you're safe, but the ink smears from your trembling hands. Inside the city, the tension is unbearable. The locals aren't just angry anymore, they're emboldened. There are secret meetings in candlelit rooms, new militias forming every week, and a creeping feeling that you're outnumbered, even in your own barracks. One day, someone steals your regimental flag and replaces it with a pig painted red. It takes 3 officers and a corporal to get it down, while the townspeople laugh themselves sick. But laughter turns to blood again soon enough. The Battle of Bunker Hill isn't far off, and already you're hearing rumors. The Colonials are fortifying the hills just outside Boston. They're digging trenches, building barricades, preparing. You know what's coming. The tension coils tighter every day, like the spring of a trap you can't quite see but can definitely feel. The streets are quiet, but not peaceful. More like that eerie calm before a thunderstorm, when the air feels wrong and even the birds disappear. You start dreaming in flashes, smoke, screams, blood on your hands that won't wash off. You stop sleeping well. Most of your regiment doesn't, either. It's like the whole garrison is holding its breath. The worst part? You volunteered for this. You chose the uniform, the flag, the promises. You believed the songs. And now, you're huddled in a bedroll that smells like feet and wet wool, asking yourself why. Over and over. Why? There's no glory here. No parades. No cheering crowds. Just mud. Mistrust. and the heavy silence of a war that hasn't even hit its full stride. And deep down, in the stillest part of your mind, you realize something terrible. The locals might actually win this. And you're going to have to watch it happen. You try not to think about the red coat, but every morning, there it is, stiff, scratchy, unmistakable. The symbol of British power, they told you. But here, in the American wilds, it's basically a walking target. You slip it on anyway, because you have to. Regulation, morale, tradition. All those tidy little military reasons. But the moment the buttons click into place, the jokes begin again. "Nice camouflage," says one of the lads as you step out of your tent, voice thick with sarcasm. Good thing the forests are naturally crimson. He's not wrong. Everywhere you go, this thing makes you visible for miles, whether you're on a patrol through dense pine woods or escorting a cart down a dusty road. That red wool shines like a beacon. Colonial sharpshooters love it. It's basically a shoot me flag sewn into your chest. And that's not even mentioning the smell. After weeks of sweat, rain, smoke, and more sweat, the coat has developed its own atmosphere. You swear it groans when you pick it up. The lining scratches your neck raw, and your sleeves are stiff with grime and, okay, let's be honest, blood. Probably not yours. Hopefully not Jenkins. The itch never stops. You scratch in your sleep. You scratch while loading your musket. You scratch while marching and mid-meal, and once, even while being shot at. You're starting to believe the uniform is cursed. And then the insects arrive. You thought British flies were annoying? American ones are worse, bigger, hungrier. They love wool, and blood, and sweaty humans who haven't bathed properly since April. Mosquitoes descend on your exposed neck like a biblical plague, and the moment you try to swat one, another bites your wrist. Ticks are worse. You'd never even heard of them before coming here. Now, you've got names for them. Gerald, Spikebug, the Duke of Necklandia. One of your friends finds a tick inside his ear. He screams, and the whole barracks doesn't sleep for a week after that. Your sergeant insists you wear the full kit anyway. Discipline, he says. Uniformity. But it's not his armpits that feel like they're on fire from all the wool chafing. Historians still argue whether British uniforms were a brilliant display of imperial discipline or just hopelessly outdated for guerrilla warfare in a humid, wooded frontier. You have a firm opinion. It's garbage. You try modifications. You loosen the collar. You roll up your sleeves until an officer spots it and gives you 5 lashes. One of the lads secretly stitches a rabbit's foot inside his coat for luck. 2 days later, he's shot in the foot. Not exactly the miracle he was hoping for. There's talk of adapting, lighter fabrics, more earth-toned trousers, but the bureaucracy back home moves slower than a limping ox. You could be dead from heat stroke before they even approve a color change. So you deal with it. You march in tight lines through forests alive with mosquitoes and dripping with humidity. Your sweat clings to the inside of your coat like it's trying to drown you. The weight of it pulls at your shoulders, and every time it rains, which is often, you carry an extra 10 pounds of soggy wool. You've seen men faint, collapse mid-drill, strip naked and jump into rivers just to escape the relentless itching. You envy them. And yet, somehow, you're expected to fight in this thing. Your first real battle in full gear comes at Bunker Hill, though you'll soon learn it's actually on Breed's Hill because nothing in this war can just be simple. You march uphill under blazing sun, shoulder to shoulder with dozens of sweating, cursing, silently terrified men. Your boots sink into soft dirt. Gunpowder smoke clings to the air. Colonials fire from behind barricades they built overnight using logs, rocks, and whatever else they had lying around. It's scrappy, improvised, effective. You're told to hold the line, fire in volleys, reload, march again. But every movement is agony in that red coat. Your musket slips in your slick hands. The sweat runs into your eyes, blurring everything. You reload slower. You breathe harder. You feel like you're cooking alive. The thick wool traps every degree of heat and won't let go. Around you, men fall, not just from bullets, some from heat exhaustion, sunstroke, dehydration. You see a man drop, still clutching his cartridge box, eyes wide in shock. No wound, just done. Body said no more. Coat said, okay, now die. And yet, you keep going. You press forward, stepping over bodies, slipping in blood, still firing. Because that's the order, because that's war. Later, the generals will call it a victory. The rebels ran, didn't they? Sure, after you lost more than 1,000 men. That's what they don't put on the commemorative mugs. You stagger back down the hill, lungs raw from smoke, your uniform soaked through with blood, sweat, and the deep, gnawing knowledge that this is only the beginning. That red coat isn't a badge of honor, it's a burden, a branding. You start to notice things you didn't before. How the rebels, those scruffy, disorganized, unprofessional colonials, wear whatever they want. Browns, grays, earth tones. They blend into the landscape while you stick out like a ripe apple on a snowbank. You envy them. A little. Okay, a lot. But you're stuck with it. One night, in the barracks, a guy named Sutter tries to dye his coat with river mud. Better to look filthy than be seen from space, he says. It actually works, for about 10 minutes. Then the dye dries, flakes off, and turns the wool into something resembling shredded parchment. He's reprimanded for uniform defacement and assigned extra latrine duty. Lesson learned, the coat stays red, even when it's falling apart, even when the seams unravel and the buttons vanish and the lining rots from mildew. Because somewhere, across the sea, some quartermaster in a polished office decided this is what a soldier looks like. Even if it gets him killed. You knew you weren't signing up to be rich, but you didn't expect to be this broke. Your first few weeks in America, you try not to think about pay. There's war brewing, after all. Bigger things to worry about. But after a few months of surviving on stale bread, one shirt, and exactly 3 working buttons on your coat, reality starts to gnaw at you. Your wages? Still haven't arrived. You were promised 8 pence a day. That sounded decent back home. Enough to support your mother. Maybe buy some new boots. At the very least, afford a pint or 2 on Sundays. But now, you're lucky if your officer even acknowledges the existence of your pay stub. And even when the money does show up, it's, let's say, underwhelming. Because that 8 pence, it's before deductions. First, they take out money for rations, even though your rations are half moldy and stolen by raccoons half the time. Then they deduct for uniform upkeep. Don't laugh. They really expect you to pay for the woolen torture device that's currently causing a fungal situation in your armpits. Then there's camp expenses, which is a fancy term for whatever else they feel like charging you. After all that, you're lucky to walk away with 4 pence a day. And guess what 4 pence doesn't buy in the colonies? Anything. Most of the locals don't even accept your British-issued paper scrip. They want silver, or gold, or barter. One woman demands 2 buttons and half a canteen of rum for a single apple. You try to haggle. She slaps you with a broom. So you start getting creative. You trade with fellow soldiers. A clean pair of socks for a candle stub. A spare flint for a threadbare blanket. One guy smuggles tobacco leaves under his shirt and sells them wrapped in old love letters. Another somehow gets coffee beans from a French trader and becomes the most popular man in the regiment. Until he's caught. Then he's the cleanest man in the regiment, thanks to weeks of latrine duty. You try to send money home, what little you have, but the postal system is slower than continental drift. One of your letters disappears for 10 months, then arrives in pieces inside a barrel of salt pork. Your mother writes back, asking why you mailed her ham. And then there's the matter of your equipment. Let's say your musket misfires, or your bayonet goes missing, or your boots fall apart after the 3rd rainstorm, which they will. Guess who's paying for that? Not the army, not the quartermaster, you. With what? Unclear. But the deduction shows up anyway. It becomes a running joke in the barracks. You know what I got paid today? Someone asks, holding up an empty palm. Exactly this much. Laughter follows, but it's a tired laugh, a broke laugh. And yet, the officers live like minor kings. They have wine, real wine, imported cheese. Some even bring their own furniture, oak chairs, writing desks, tiny libraries of books with gold-embossed covers. Their coats are tailored, their boots polished, and their meals hot. Meanwhile, you're trying to figure out if it's safe to eat something that just crawled out of your biscuit tin. Historians still debate whether the pay disparity between ranks contributed directly to desertion rates. But come on, you don't need a historian. Just look around. Men are disappearing, slowly, subtly. A patrol goes out with 6, comes back with 5. One guy claims a bear got his buddy. You don't ask follow-up questions. You consider it too. Desertion. It's a quiet thought at first. Just a whisper during a long night in wet socks. What if you walked away, disappeared into the forest, found a farm somewhere and lied about your name? But there's nowhere to go. The locals hate you. The other colonies hate you. Even you kind of hate you. The only place that might take you is the sea. And last time you were on a ship, you threw up for 2 weeks straight and briefly forgot your own birthday. So you stay. You keep showing up for drill. Keep shining your musket. Keep saluting officers who couldn't find their own latrines without a map and 3 assistants. You're not loyal. Just stuck. One afternoon, a shipment finally arrives. The entire camp buzzes. Men rush to the quartermaster's tent, hoping for pay. Supplies. Something. But inside, crates of buttons. Buttons. That's it. A few musket balls, some moldy flour, and more buttons than anyone could possibly need. Your friend Blackwell takes 3, sews them onto his hat like medals, and declares himself captain of poverty. Everyone laughs. Again, tiredly. There's one moment that sticks with you. You're sitting outside the barracks, staring at your boots, split at the heel, soles thin as parchment. A local boy wanders past, chewing an apple. He sees you, stares, then holds out the half-eaten fruit. You reach for it. Then he pulls it back and throws it in the mud. Smiles, walks away, and you just sit there. Because you can't afford to care anymore. You joined the army thinking you'd send money home, build a future, maybe even buy a small shop one day. Instead, you're knee-deep in debt, hungry, filthy, and one sneeze away from losing a tooth to scurvy. You signed a contract with a king, but you didn't realize you were selling your soul for 8 pence and a moldy biscuit. You wake up to shouting. Again, someone's missing a musket. Someone else has found fleas in their blanket. Again, and across the barracks, your bunkmate is crying because his bread ration is green, moving, and possibly trying to escape. Welcome to Tuesday. When you're not in battle, and you're not, most of the time, you spend your days locked in a maddening cycle of tedium, discomfort, and the subtle mental unraveling that comes from almost having a purpose, but not quite. They call it camp life. You call it a slow, itchy spiral toward insanity. Your days start early. Before sunrise, a trumpet blares, and you roll out of your lice-infested bedding into boots that are somehow still wet from last week's rain. Your coat? Damp? Your socks? Don't ask. Breakfast is hard biscuit and salted meat so old you suspect it once marched in the last war. You stand in formation. Drill. March. Reload. Drill again. The sergeant screams. Always. You once sneezed during inspection and spent the next hour digging a trench as punishment. Another man yawned and got assigned to night watch, alone, on the coldest hill in camp. They're not subtle, and when you're not being yelled at, you're waiting to be yelled at. Boredom settles into your bones. There's nothing to do. No books, no cards. Not unless you're lucky enough to know someone who can whittle dice out of a deer's knuckle. You end up watching ants wage tiny wars just for something to root for. You and a few mates try inventing a game with pebbles and empty cartridges. It gets banned. Unmilitary conduct, they say. You stare at the officer who said that and imagine him getting locked in a barrel of your footwater. Sometimes, the locals sneak in to sell things. Bread, soap, even rum, if they're feeling brave. But that goes poorly fast. A loaf turns out to be filled with sawdust. One bar of soap is made mostly of lard and ash. One bottle of rum might be kerosene. You find that out the loud way. Historians still argue whether this kind of local sabotage was organized resistance or just everyday spite, but either way, it leaves you miserable and suspicious of every baked good. And then there's him. There's always that one guy. A petty officer with a personal vendetta against happiness. In your case, it's Corporal Reese. Bald, beady-eyed, and convinced he's training you for the second coming of Caesar's legion. He reports everything. A loose strap? Right up. A joke during latrine duty? 3 lashes. One time, you sighed too loud and ended up cleaning musket barrels for 6 hours. You fantasize about swapping his powder pouch with biscuit crumbs. You don't, but the thought warms you like a campfire. And theft. Oh, the theft. At first, it's subtle. A missing spoon, a stolen extra blanket. Then it gets bolder. Someone lifts a full cartridge belt during roll call. One guy loses both boots while wearing them. You learn fast. Never leave anything unattended. Tie your gear to your cot. Sleep with one hand on your pack. Hide emergency rations in places you don't want to talk about. But even worse than theft, the punishments. Flogging. That's the army's favorite solution. You mess up, they beat you in front of everyone. You watch a man take 100 lashes for falling asleep on sentry duty. His back becomes a thing of legend, a roadmap of pain. He's never quite the same after, walks differently, talks less, looks past people instead of at them. One guy tries to desert. They catch him, bash him, brand him, then make him dig latrines for a week while everyone throws rotten bread at him. You think about running too, but you can't even afford boots. And the last guy who tried to swim to freedom was dragged back by the tide. Dead. Probably. You try not to ask. There are moments, brief, blurry ones, where things feel almost normal. A letter from home. A stolen peach from a trader's cart. A song someone hums while sharpening a bayonet. You cling to those moments like driftwood, but they vanish fast. Then come the storms. Rain turns camp into soup. Your tent leaks. Your socks rot. You wake up soaked and colder than you thought possible without snow. One night, lightning hits a supply cart. It explodes. Everyone cheers for once. Something different happened. Your health? A joke. There's no doctor, just a surgeon who smells like wine and judgment. He carries a saw more often than a needle. You know if you ever get wounded, your best hope is a clean amputation and a priest who's not out of prayers. You do not get paper bandages. You get cloth. You don't get medicine. You get prayers and dirt. The guy 2 bunks over caught something last week. No one knows what. He's been muttering nonsense and vomiting like a volcano since Tuesday. They moved him to the edge of camp. You check your own skin nightly, half expecting to find new boils or a rash shaped like King George. One morning, a man dies in his sleep. No battle, no glory. Just slips away in the night, face frozen like he saw something awful in his dreams. He's buried the next day with barely a marker. 2 planks and a boot with no mate. That's how it is. You're not in a war camp. You're in a waiting room for misery. You think back to the posters, the recruiters, the speeches. Honor, duty, glory. But no one said anything about spending 12 hours digging ditches in rain so heavy your thoughts come out soggy. No one mentioned that boredom could hurt worse than bullets, that rot could outpace revolution. And somewhere out there, the rebels are watching, waiting. You're not resting, you're rusting. There's a reason they call them rebels. You learn quickly that the enemy doesn't play by your rules, or wear anything even close to a uniform half the time. The American rebels come at you in ways you didn't train for, in places you didn't think a fight was even possible. 1 minute, you're escorting a supply wagon through a narrow wooded path. Next minute, crack, whiz, snap. Someone's bleeding out next to you, and you never even saw where the bullet came from. It's not war. It's whack-a-mole with actual death. You think maybe it's just bad luck, that the rebels got one over on you once, but it keeps happening. Again and again. They don't march in neat lines. They don't wait for trumpet signals. They hide. Behind trees, in barns, under riverbanks. They shoot from behind stone fences and vanish before you can say, was that even a person? Historians still argue whether the effectiveness of guerrilla tactics was exaggerated in the broader arc of the war. But for you, it's very real. Every tree is suspect. Every shadow, a maybe. You start to flinch at birdsong because once, a musket fired right after a blue jay chirped, and your brain forever paired the two. Your officers call them cowards, uncivilized, criminals. But deep down, you can feel the fear vibrating in their jawlines when they talk about ambushes, about men being dragged off in the night, about supply lines going dark. One day, a patrol leaves camp. 6 men, only 2 come back, pale, shaking. One is missing a boot. The other won't let go of a bloodied hat that isn't his. They don't speak for days. The rebels are ghosts, farmers by day, riflemen by dusk, phantoms by midnight. And don't even get started on the forests. You never knew trees could make you feel hunted. They close in, block the sun, twist sound so it comes from the wrong direction. You hear whispers in the wind. Leaves crunch when no one's there. You hope it's an animal. But last week, they found a British drummer hanging from a branch. No note, no sound, just his little drum beside him, cut in half like a warning. And that's the creepy side of it. There's a ridiculous side too. You once spent an entire afternoon trying to catch a boy who'd been throwing spoiled apples at your sentries from a hayloft. Every time you looked up, he disappeared. Every time you turned around, splut, another apple to the back. You finally caught him hours later, only to find he'd left behind a note that read, "Better aim than your army." You couldn't even be mad. You kind of admired it. But not all rebels are kids with fruit. Some are straight up terrifying. Like the woman in Pennsylvania who lured 4 redcoats into her barn with fresh bread and ended up locking them in the hayloft for 2 weeks until a rebel unit came by to collect them. Or the tavern keeper who poisoned a whole squad with wine that, in hindsight, tasted too good for the colonies. The rebels weaponize everything. Geography, weather, food. You once bit into a biscuit and chipped a tooth because someone had baked a pebble inside. It was deliberate, you know it. Worse, they know the land. You're stumbling around like a blind man in someone else's house. They know which creeks flood, which hills echo better, which caves run so deep your horse won't go near them. You try to map the terrain, but it changes when it rains, or so it seems. Like the country is on their side, not yours. One mission has you chasing a rebel supply caravan through the swamps of the Carolinas. You trudge for 2 days through sucking mud, foul enough to make your eyes water. You lose a boot. A man loses a horse. Eventually, the caravan turns out to be a decoy. Empty crates. No rebels. Just a small note. Thanks for the walk. You start to lose sleep. You imagine footsteps in the dark. You double-check your powder horn 3 times before a march. You're not sure if you're paranoid or finally developing a survival instinct. Then come the traps. The rebels don't just shoot. They prepare things. Nets. Pitfalls. Tripwires tied to bells. You once saw a rebel line a road with chicken feathers just to make your cavalry second-guess the ground's stability. One squad found themselves stuck for hours trying to cross a log bridge with boom scratched into the middle in charcoal. There was no boom. Just psychological warfare, and it worked. They're also insanely good at misinformation. You get orders that say, "Rebel camp northeast." You go northeast. There's no one there. Instead, your camp gets raided while you're gone. How'd they know? Someone probably bribed a courier or swapped a map. You start suspecting everyone, especially the scouts. Especially the ones with American accents, which, if you're honest, is most of them. The war turns into a kind of hide and seek that you're too slow to win and too tired to quit. Even when you do catch a rebel, it's rarely satisfying. They don't break. They grin. Sometimes they spit. One just said, "Don't worry, more of us every day," and then passed out from blood loss like it was nothing. You think back to what the generals promised, that the war would be short, that these insurgents would fold under pressure. But here you are, months in, boots ruined, nerves frayed, and your biggest accomplishment this week was not falling into a pit full of sharpened sticks. And still, you haven't seen a proper battle in weeks, just ambushes and raids, and that gut-knotting fear that comes when a bird call doesn't sound quite right. You wonder if the rebels ever sleep. You wonder if they even need to. By now, you've stopped hoping for normal. The war has bent you, warped you into a version of yourself that thinks boiled leather is an acceptable dinner, that jumps when twigs snap, and that squints at squirrels like they're potential assassins. But this next part breaks you in a new way. Because now, it's not just the rebels against you. It's everyone. You're walking into a village, orders in hand, expecting the standard cold stares and tense silences. Instead, a woman hands you a pie. It smells good, suspiciously good. You take a bite, carefully. It's peach, fresh, sweet. Then your officer eats his slice, and 15 minutes later, he's curled up behind a shed, moaning like a haunted church bell. You realize the pie was for you, yes, but not in the way you hoped. Historians still argue whether poisonings were widespread or just infamous one-offs, but your stomach isn't taking any chances. You eye every plate like it's an act of war. You've even started boiling your own water, which is a real pain because you don't have a pot. Every time you meet civilians now, you play a guessing game, loyalist or patriot. Old farmer with a limp might be just an old farmer, or he might be hiding 5 muskets in the pig pen. That smiling child could be harmless, could also be the lookout for a rebel ambush waiting just beyond the ridge. Even your own maps become suspicious. You're handed one drawn by a local guide, and the roads seem fine, until you find yourself up to your thighs in swamp mud, watching your horse try to backpedal out of panic. The map was a trap. The swamp wasn't even on your old chart. This is the part of the war where paranoia isn't a flaw. It's a lifestyle. You meet a man who used to be in logistics. His whole job was setting up supply chains. Smart guy, good handwriting. He tells you he once traded half his unit's gunpowder for bread that turned out to be made of compressed sawdust and onions. Still gave everyone splinters, he mutters, shaking his head. He hasn't been promoted since. The rebels know how to make you bleed without firing a shot. They turn the very idea of comfort into a liability. So, you give up on comfort. You sleep in your boots now. You don't bother with blankets. Someone stole yours anyway. You keep your powder dry by hiding it in your hat. And you stop using tents, because that one time you did, someone snuck in and replaced your trousers with a note that said, "Red's out of style." Even the locals who pretend to like you always have that look, that subtle almost smirk that says, "We know you're losing." You visit a tavern once. The barkeep offers a drink on the house. Your friend accepts. You decline. Your friend ends up singing sea shanties with a turnip for 2 hours. The barkeep just shrugs and says, "Must have been the humidity." Sure, you've seen that smile before. It's the same one your grandmother used when she gave you a gift that turned out to be socks made of porcupine hair. And there's that one infamous town, maybe in New Jersey, maybe not, where you were quartered for a week. Nice people, generous with food and drink. Too generous. You wake up the next morning and half your squad's weapons are gone, or stolen, replaced with wooden fakes that had, "Oops," carved into the stocks. The worst part, it was kind of funny. You can't even stay angry. You're too tired, too jaded. There's a young soldier in your unit, bright-eyed, fresh off the ship. Still writes letters to his mother in London. He tries to ask a local girl for directions. She leads him straight into a beehive. Literally. You had to pry stingers out of his ears for hours. She giggled as she ran off. You realize at some point that even nature seems to be rooting for the rebels. It's always too hot, too cold, too muddy, too buggy. You cross a creek only to find your boots full of leeches. You stop for shade, and 3 spiders immediately declare squatters' rights on your hat. You sneeze once and disturb a raccoon who is very not okay with being awakened and express this through claws and chaos. One morning, you're supposed to inspect a village. Nothing major. Just routine presence, let them know who's in charge. You open a barn door and find nothing. Not a single cow, horse, or chicken. Which would be fine, except 2 days ago, there were dozens. It's like the livestock vanished. You later hear a rumor that the townsfolk moved the animals underground. Underground. Dug tunnels, lined them with hay, and stored the whole ecosystem like wartime contraband. You don't know whether to applaud or cry. This is what it means to be a redcoat now. You're a walking target in a land where the shadows have secrets, the pies have plans, and every smiling face might be the last thing you ever see before getting beamed with a shovel. And there's no break from it. Your mail from home? Intercepted. Your payroll? Missing. Your morale? Somewhere in a ditch back in New York, sipping root beer with your dignity. By the end of the month, you've started talking to a chicken that hangs around your camp. You name him Charles. Charles listens. Charles doesn't lie. Charles also probably isn't working for the rebels, but you can't totally be sure. You wouldn't have believed any of this 6 months ago. But now, as you lie awake on rocky ground, chewing on what might be dried fish or might be a poorly disguised sock, you accept it. The civilians are not neutral. And you're not in control of this war. You're just trying not to be outsmarted by a baker, a goat, or a 12-year-old with really good aim. It starts with whispers. One moment you're polishing your musket with a rag that smells like regret, and the next, someone mutters that a regiment just disappeared. No battle, no report, gone. You scoff. Redcoats don't vanish. That's not how the British Army works. There's always a chain of command, always a paper trail, always some officer somewhere to blame when everything falls apart. But then you hear it again, and this time it's your regiment. Not vanished, no, but abandoned. Left to camp on the edge of a dense forest where birds don't sing, and the trees feel like they're watching. No orders come. No fresh supplies arrive. You're told to hold position, which is code for, we forgot about you and nobody wants to admit it. You begin counting your biscuits, 4.5. 2 are mostly mold. The officer in charge insists reinforcements are coming. He says this like someone reciting a bedtime story he doesn't believe anymore. You catch him whispering to himself at night, rocking on a log and polishing his boots in the dark. Reinforcements, he repeats. Reinforcements are always coming. Historians still argue whether these long silences from British High Command were due to miscommunication, incompetence, or pure chaos, but to you, it feels more personal, like the war is slowly deleting you from existence. One day, a courier arrives. You're ecstatic. A letter, maybe even rations. Nope, it's a message for another unit, one that left the region weeks ago. You read it anyway, just to remember what official ink looks like. It smells like bureaucracy and failure. Then, there's the forest. You weren't sure it could get worse than swamp patrols and rebel ambushes, but now you're sleeping under trees that seem to move at night. You swear you woke up facing a completely different direction, musket gone, boots missing, and a squirrel sitting smugly on your chest. No one believes you, of course, but they should. There's a sound the forest makes. Not quite wind, not quite growl. It's a hum, low and slow, like it's chewing on your name. You see shadows that don't belong to anything. Shapes dart between trees too fast for human feet. And always, there's the whispering. At first, you think it's the men. But then you realize they've stopped talking altogether. You go days without conversation. Just rustling leaves, creaking branches, and the occasional scream from someone dreaming about home. Or about rats. Or about screaming rats on ships, which is somehow worse. One morning, a soldier named Dobson wanders off. He says he's going to relieve himself behind a tree. He never comes back. You search. For hours. No blood. No prints. Just a single sock and a copy of Pilgrim's Progress with the pages torn out in reverse order. You never liked Dobson, but now you miss his snoring. The officer tells you to stay alert, which is unhelpful, because you haven't not been alert in weeks. Your nerves are so shot that a snapping twig makes you drop your canteen. It rolls into the brush. You leave it. Hydration isn't worth the risk. You start keeping a tally on your knuckles. How many nights? How many missing? How many times the forest tries to trick you by mimicking your own voice? Yes, that happens. You hear yourself calling your name. Private, over here. But it's not you, and it's not anyone. One of the younger lads chases it. He's smiling when he runs into the trees, like he's headed to a picnic. That was the last you saw of him. His bedroll's still there, untouched. The forest starts making you question time. Is it still July? Has it ever been July? You check the sun. It seems to hover in the same place all afternoon. Then set too fast, like it's trying to get away. Night hits hard. Fast. Like someone snuffed out a candle and forgot to warn you. You start sleeping in short bursts, 2 hours at most, any longer, and the dreams get too loud. They're not dreams about battle anymore. Now it's things like endless hallways, eyes without faces, a staircase made of teeth. You wake up with a taste of copper and forget your own name for 10 minutes. Someone starts a fire one night. Just a small one, just for warmth. A terrible idea. Within seconds, it's like the forest wakes up angry. Wind picks up from nowhere. Sparks swirl into shapes that seem to hiss. The flames turn blue. No one sleeps that night. You begin to think this is the punishment. Not just for being a redcoat, but for believing this would be a regular war. For thinking uniforms and flags and muskets would somehow protect you from the raw weirdness of a continent that clearly doesn't want you here. One evening, a letter finally arrives addressed to your unit. It says you're being reassigned to a higher risk area. You laugh. What's higher risk than disappearing into tree-shaped despair? But orders are orders. You march. The forest doesn't stop following you. It watches from the tree lines. The air carries the same hum, and though the terrain changes, the feeling doesn't. You're starting to believe the land itself is part of the resistance. Not just the rebels, not just the people, but the place. It's a living thing, with opinions, and you are very much unwelcome. You once joked to a fellow soldier that if the trees could talk, they'd probably be patriots. Now you're not so sure they can't talk. You just hope they're bad at aiming. And so, you march on, half your regiment gone, the rest too tired to question orders anymore. You're not sure where you're going, but you're very sure you don't want to go back, because at least now you're moving. And if you stop too long, well, you know what happens to those who linger. You're in New York now. Or, well, what's left of it. After the forest, after the silence, after the endless whispering that may or may not have been ghosts or wind or regret, you arrive in the city that's supposed to be the British stronghold. A place of order, civility, clean uniforms, crumpets even. Instead, rot. The streets reek of sewage and soot. The harbor's a mess of broken masts and anxious gulls. Smoke drifts permanently over the rooftops like the city itself is quietly on fire, but nobody can agree on who started it or if it matters. You trudge past rows of half-burned homes and shattered windows. There's a man playing a violin with 3 strings and a blindfold on. You don't ask. This, apparently, is your reward for surviving. You're reassigned to patrol duty, a generous term for stand in an alley with an unloaded musket and hope no one notices you. One mainstream fact that sticks in your head: after the Great Fire of 1776, nearly 500 buildings in New York were reduced to ash, leaving thousands homeless. A British-controlled city, and yet chaos everywhere. Historians still argue whether the fire was set by patriot arsonists, accidental rebels, or just bad luck and dry roofs. You personally blame the pigeons. You sleep in a makeshift barracks that used to be a tavern. The ale stench hasn't left the walls, and neither have the fleas. Your mattress is straw, but somehow still manages to feel like gravel. You dream of horses with human eyes. You miss the forest. They say New York's the crown jewel now. The military HQ, the British Empire's northern throne. It looks more like a haunted attic that someone keeps sweeping dust into, hoping no one notices the rats. The locals hate you. Not the dramatic, loud, shouting kind of hate you might expect. No, this is quiet, controlled, the kind that burns in stares. Shopkeepers refuse to serve you unless your officer's there. Children point at you and make little gagging noises. You get fruit thrown at you, which sounds funny until you realize fruit is expensive. They're wasting actual food to insult you. That's commitment. And then there's the prison ships. You guard one for a week, the Jersey, or as everyone calls it, the floating hell. You're not even allowed to speak to the prisoners. Just stand at the edge of the pier and try not to inhale. The stench is indescribable, decay and despair mixed with brine and sickness. At night, the moans rise through the air like steam. Some redcoats place bets on how many will die by morning. You don't bet. You just tighten your coat and try to pretend you're somewhere else. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some British soldiers started referring to the prison ships as royal coffins, since men entered and never left. Even the rats seemed uneasy around them. Your boots are falling apart. Your coat smells like smoke, mildew, and hopelessness. And your pay? Delayed. Again, you haven't received full wages in months. The officer says it's due to logistical complexities, which you now know is British for "we spent it all on wigs and tea." So now you're not just a target, you're a broke target. The only entertainment comes from watching other soldiers crack. One corporal tries to grow potatoes in a helmet. Another insists he can speak raccoon. You're starting to believe him. When the rebels sneak into the city to set fires or sabotage wagons, you're not surprised. You almost respect the effort. After all, they're fighting for something. You're just working. Punching in, punching out. If you don't die, you go home. Maybe. If someone remembers. A few soldiers begin switching sides. Quietly. Carefully. One day they're at morning roll call. Next day? Vanished. You find a single redcoat folded neatly in an alley with a note pinned to it. Wrong team. The officer doesn't mention it. You all just step over it and pretend nothing happened. There's a rumor of a secret tavern where deserters gather. They say it smells like roasted duck and freedom. You consider asking around. But the last soldier who asked too many questions got reassigned to Staten Island. No one hears from him now. Maybe he is Staten Island. You begin counting wagons that leave the city. 1 per day. Sometimes 2. None return. Eventually, you're rotated to supply duty, which sounds luxurious, until you realize that means guarding food that mysteriously disappears every night. Your squad is accused of stealing. You aren't. But the officer still makes you sleep outside for a week as punishment. You get frostbite in one toe and name it King George out of spite. At this point, the rebels aren't even your biggest fear. It's the boredom. The kind that gnaws at your brain and makes you start naming pigeons and playing imaginary chess against ghosts. You lose. Often. One night, you find a scrap of rebel newspaper stuffed in a gutter. The ink's smudged, but it reads, "Our death." You laugh, not because it's funny, but because you've seen so much death now, the idea of choosing between liberty and it seems wildly optimistic. Then comes the parade. You're told to polish your gear and stand tall. Important British officers are visiting. Time to show the city that His Majesty's army is still strong. You do your best. You line up. You adjust your hat. And then one of the visiting officers vomits directly in front of your boots. He's seasick. or drunk, or just overwhelmed by the city's unique bouquet. You don't even flinch. You've seen worse. You are worse. The officer salutes. His wig slips. You salute back. Your glove is torn. No one says anything. Because that's New York now. A city trying to convince itself it still matters while everything around it crumbles into smoke, scandal, and sewage. The longer you're stationed here, the more you realize the truth. You're not defending an empire. You're maintaining a facade. And it's cracking faster than you can load your musket. You've been reassigned. Again, this time, you're shipped off to the Carolinas. They don't even specify which one, just the Carolinas, like it's a single damp nightmare stitched together by mosquitoes and regret. You travel south in a convoy of rattling wagons, your legs cramping beneath the weight of supplies no one asked for and food no one wants. The humidity hits you like a wet slap the second you cross into the low country. Your uniform, already faded and frayed, becomes a sponge. You sweat until your sweat has sweat. You learn a new mainstream historical fact. By 1780, the Southern Campaign had become the British Army's desperate attempt to gain momentum after the Northern colonies proved too stubborn. Historians still argue whether this was strategic brilliance or a last-ditch flail into a hornet's nest. You're voting hornets. You're barely in the Carolinas 2 days before someone in your unit gets bit by a snake. Not the cool, cinematic kind. No, just a swamp-colored noodle of venom and bad decisions. The medic shrugs, applies some leeches, and mutters about balance in nature. That soldier dies 3 days later. Nobody's shocked. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some redcoats began rubbing tobacco juice on their skin to ward off bugs. It didn't work. It just made them smell like wet ashes and regret. You try it anyway. You meet the loyalists, local colonists who say they're with you. Most of them speak with a southern drawl so thick, you're not sure whether they're giving you directions or cursing your ancestry. They smile too much. You don't trust anyone who smiles that much in wartime. Your job now? Burn farms. That's right, farms. It's called scorched earth, and your commander says it with a kind of bureaucratic distance that makes you want to scream. You march into little hamlets with wooden fences and muddy wells and pull out the torches. You light the hay. You kick over chicken coops. You set grain stores aflame. It's hard to feel like the good guy while making roasted cornmeal smoke signals. Children cry. Mothers curse you in accents that feel too familiar. You're not across the world anymore. You're just a man in someone else's yard, setting their winter survival on fire. One man pleads with you not to torch his barn, offers you a jug of cider and 3 chickens in trade. You don't even get to respond. Your officer orders it burned. You watch the man sink to his knees as the flames eat through his roof. His wife holds a baby and stares at you like you're already dead. You feel it too. They call this counterinsurgency. You call it villainy with paperwork. The rebels in the South don't fight fair either. They ambush supply lines, disappear into trees, shoot from shadows. No uniforms, no formalities. You call them swamp ghosts. One of your mates, a drummer boy named Ellis, vanishes during a river crossing. Later, someone finds his cap nailed to a tree with a note, "Go home." You keep seeing the cap in your dreams. Sometimes it talks. Your boots are mush. Your socks, moldy. You haven't been dry in weeks. Everything smells like mildew and onions, and you haven't eaten a fresh vegetable since last winter. Scurvy's making a comeback. You name your bleeding gums General Toothless. And the worst part, you're not even winning. Cornwallis is trying. Lord knows he's trying. But every inch you gain, you lose the next week. Every battle feels like a bad sequel. Same swamp, same gunpowder, different regrets. There's a rumor the rebels are being helped by French officers now. That really stings. Getting beaten by colonists is one thing. Getting beaten by colonists with French backup feels like a cosmic insult. Your captain tries to rally morale. He gives a speech atop a barrel, quoting Shakespeare and King George in the same breath. Halfway through, The barrel collapses. Morale remains unchanged. You march. You sweat. You wake up to find ticks on places you didn't know had skin. One guy thinks he's immune to malaria because he ate a lizard. He's wrong. You raid a plantation where someone claims rebels are hiding supplies. You find nothing but old books and a horse wearing a bonnet. You salute the horse out of respect. Every loyalist farm you torch makes more rebels. It's like trying to mop up water with a sponge that leaks on both ends. You're not crushing rebellion. You're feeding it. And then, one morning, you're ambushed. The columns stretch too thin. The trees whisper again, only this time, they come alive with musket fire. Screams echo in the fog. Horses buck and collapse. You dive into a ditch, your musket slippery in your hands, and fire blindly. You don't know who you hit, or if you hit anything. When the smoke clears, the rebels are gone. So are half your men. The rest of you huddle together, bleeding and shaking, waiting for someone to declare victory or retreat. No one does. You just stare into the trees and hope they stay trees. That night, you eat hardtack soaked in river water. You cry quietly behind a tent. Not because you're scared anymore, because you're tired. Bone deep, world weary, soul withered. You never wanted to be a redcoat. You just wanted steady pay and a decent pair of boots. Now you're sleeping under a half-burned wagon, spooning your bayonet like a teddy bear, and praying the frogs don't mutiny. And somewhere in the distance, a rebel whistle calls. It's not music, it's a reminder. You're not welcome here, and tomorrow, you're marching deeper into the storm. You'd think by now you've seen the worst of it. But welcome to Virginia, where the sun bakes your skin into jerky, and the rebellion reaches a fever pitch. The land here looks more civilized at first. Wider roads, tidier towns, even the barns look judgmental. But the fighting, it's louder, meaner, more personal. This is the colony where everything seems to be unraveling all at once. You arrive ragged. Your coat is now pinkish gray from sun, salt, and sweat. Your hat smells like cheese. You've got 3 teeth you're not sure were yours to begin with. The only reason your musket still works is because a kind Virginian girl offered you some homemade grease and then cursed you out when she learned what you were. Fair. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Virginia was the birthplace of several rebel leaders, including George Washington and Thomas Jefferson. They weren't just organizing from here, they were from here. It's home turf, and every hill, tree, and pig trail seems to be working against you. You're marching with Lord Cornwallis now. He's not doing great. Historians still argue whether his southern strategy was doomed from the start or sabotaged by poor logistics, bad intel, and an underestimation of just how angry colonists can get when you touch their tobacco sheds. You think it's all of the above, plus fleas. There's this village near the James River. You're told to dig in and fortify it. So, naturally, you start by stealing wood from nearby homes. The residents protest. You offer them protection. One old woman throws a spoon at your head. You duck, barely. And then the French arrive. Full navy, real ships, cannons with names painted on the sides like Léonard and La Justice. You watch the sails gliding in like ghost wings over the horizon and think, oh good, we're doomed with international flair now. Your quirky tidbit, French troops brought with them hair pomade and scented handkerchiefs. Your camp starts to smell like a weird mix of gunpowder and lavender. You're not sure whether you're at war or preparing for a Colonial perfume commercial. You hear whispers, Yorktown. That's where you're heading. Cornwallis is betting the coast is your best chance. Fortify, regroup, maybe get evacuated by sea. That's the plan. It's just temporary, the officers say. We'll get out soon. Spoiler, you won't. Yorktown is a charming coastal town filled with beautiful views and the heavy scent of dread. You dig trenches, build earthworks, stack barrels. You keep your head low because American artillery is already scouting the hills. And the French? They're helping them aim. The siege starts quietly. Just a few distant booms at first, then more, then 100. Cannonballs sail through the sky like angry iron birds. Some explode on impact. Others bounce and tumble through the camp like deadly skipping stones. One takes out your tent. Another takes out your tent mate. You're too tired to panic anymore. You just lay there in a shallow trench, chewing your last stick of jerky, praying your skeleton stays in one piece. By day 6, there's barely a square foot of dirt that hasn't been dug up or exploded. By day 10, the rebels are close enough that you can hear their drummers at night. The same beat, over and over, echoing through the damp Virginia air like a metronome for your mental breakdown. You try writing a letter home. You get as far as "Dear" and start crying. Cornwallis stops holding public briefings. Rumor is he's hiding in a bunker with a map, a bottle, and 1,000-yard stare. The officers above you argue over how much powder is left. One says, "Enough." The other says, "For what?" You get assigned to night patrol. That's where you meet him, an American scout. Just a kid, maybe 17. You spot each other across a moonlit field. Neither of you fires. He waves. You raise your hand slowly. You don't say a word. You both know what's coming. On October 17th, a white flag goes up. Just like that, years of marching, bleeding, sweating, regretting, all grinding to a halt with a piece of cloth fluttering in the breeze. You don't feel relief. You feel empty. The next day, formal surrender. Here's your PG-13 reality check. You have to stack your weapons in front of a crowd. Bayonets down. Powder bags surrendered. The rebel drummer boys play a tune. Some say it's the world turned upside down, though historians still argue whether that was just a rumor added later for poetic effect. You look into the eyes of the rebels lining the path. Some smug, some sad, some just boys with mud on their boots and hatred in their eyes. You want to scream, "I didn't even want to be here." But you don't. You just set your musket down gently. Like it's fragile. Like if you're quiet enough, the shame might not stick. You're now a prisoner of war. The Americans, to their credit, don't kill you. But you're marched inland. Watched. Counted. Confined. You meet other redcoats. Some weep. Some laugh hysterically. One guy tries to pretend he's Swiss. He's not. Food is scarce. Clean water scarcer. You sleep on straw that smells like cheese feet. The guards aren't cruel. They're just tired, same as you. Everyone here seems like they've lived 5 lifetimes in the span of 3 years, and then, slowly, it ends. The war. The papers. The treaties. They say peace. They say independence. They say go home. But where even is home now? Back in London, people are already forgetting your name, your unit, your war. You hear one final insult before you're released. They're calling it the American experiment. Like the whole thing was just a quirky science fair gone nuclear. You walk with a limp. Your hearing is half gone in one ear. You've got a scar on your shoulder from a splintered musket that broke in a swamp ambush. And you're going back to a country that has no parades for losers. They'll give you a small pension. Maybe. But no medals. No thanks. Just silence. You were a redcoat, and now you're just a shadow of one. You shuffle off the boat like a man twice your age, back to the docks of England, where the sky seems permanently grey and the wind always carries the scent of wet rope and regret. The war is over, technically, but it doesn't feel like a victory. Not for you. Not for anyone wearing a red coat. There's no one waiting. No banners, no band. Just a dock worker who looks at your faded uniform and raises an eyebrow like, "Still at it, are you?" You're not exactly sure where to go. The army doesn't need you anymore. The recruiters have vanished, the officers have gone silent, and your pay, what little of it there was, stopped weeks ago. You walk until your feet blister through the holes in your boots, following the vague scent of bread until you find a pub with a help wanted sign and a barkeep willing to pay half a shilling a day for dishwashing. You don't even ask. You just start scrubbing. Here's your mainstream historical fact. After the American Revolution, Thousands of returning British soldiers found themselves jobless, homeless, and largely ignored by the government. Many were simply discharged with no plan, no pension, and no public recognition. And this isn't just you. You hear whispers from other ex-Redcoats, some limping, some missing fingers or eyes, others too shaken to speak above a whisper. You meet one lad from your old unit who pretends he never left England. He tells girls he was working on ships. You nod. You pretend too. The war is turning into a story now, one being told by people who weren't there. Parliament blames the generals. The generals blame the politicians. The politicians blame the weather. No one blames the strategy, or the fact that the Americans just cared more. You try selling your musket once. The pawnshop owner laughs and asks if it shoots ale now. You leave it by the river. The fringe tidbit for tonight? Some redcoats, abandoned and adrift, ended up joining criminal gangs or fleeing to remote corners of the empire, Australia, Ireland, even Canada, where they hoped to find purpose again. Others turned to odd jobs or enlisted in other regiments, chasing the only thing they knew, war. You think about rejoining. The army's still got postings in India, in Africa, in the Caribbean, but your body says no. Your knees say absolutely not. Your soul? It hasn't answered in weeks, so you settle. You rent a room above a bakery, where the ceiling leaks and the floor creaks with every step. The baker's daughter offers you leftover crusts sometimes. You try not to cry over them. There's a market square down the road. On Sundays, someone always brings pamphlets talking about the glory of the empire. You read one once. It called the American Rebellion, a minor colonial disturbance. You folded it into a paper boat and watched it sink in the rain. Historians still argue whether Britain's loss in America truly marked the decline of its global dominance, or whether it simply forced the empire to evolve, to expand elsewhere, harder, faster. But to you, it felt like the end of something real, something personal. Sometimes you hear church bells and flinch. Sometimes a door slams and your heart stops for half a second. Sometimes you wake up clutching a stick like a bayonet. You keep to yourself. It's easier that way. But you can't escape the looks. They see the limp, the scars, the sunburned neckline. They know. You're one of the Redcoats. A relic, a walking reminder of what happens when you bet on the wrong side of history. You overhear children calling it the war for freedom. You want to shout, freedom from what? But you don't. You just keep sweeping the pub floor and whistling tunes no one else remembers. One day, a man from the government comes through the village. He asks if any veterans live here. You raise your hand. He gives you a form. It promises a pension if you can prove you served. You laugh for 5 minutes straight before tossing it in the fire. You've got no papers, no medals, no proof, only scars and nightmares and memories of a boy from Virginia who waved at you in the dark. Your body creaks like old wood now. Your hands shake when you drink tea. And yet, every now and then, you find yourself standing outside at night, staring at the stars, wondering if somewhere across the sea, the people you fought against still remember your face. You never learned what happened to your captain, or that girl who gave you grease, or the old woman with the spoon. But sometimes you swear you hear distant drums, soft, rhythmic, steady. And for a heartbeat, you're back in your red coat, back in the mud, back under fire. Then you blink. And it's just the wind rattling your window. You go back to bed. You try to sleep. And when you do, you dream of surrendering again. Not with a white flag this time, but with open hands. The war follows you, even when no one speaks of it. Years pass, but you still can't quite let it go. The red coat may have been folded away, moth-eaten, and forgotten in a trunk you never open, but it lives on in your posture, your mannerisms, your haunted quiet. It's in the way you instinctively check corners before entering a room, in the way you flinch when a chair scrapes too loudly, in how you sleep, one eye half open, fists clenched like the musket's still there. You try to move on, you do. You get a job mending fishing nets. You rent a better room, one that doesn't leak. You start saving a few pence every week. Even smile sometimes. But England is changing. The whispers of revolution don't stop with America. The French are boiling over. There's talk in the pubs about the rights of man, about liberty, about heads in baskets. You sip your ale slower. You once fought to stop revolution. Now you sit and watch men your age, younger even, calling for it in your own backyard. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Many veterans of the American Revolution lived to witness the dawn of revolutions elsewhere, France, Haiti, Ireland, each echoing the same cry for self-rule that once blasted through the fields of Concord and Yorktown. The dominoes were already falling. You feel like a tree in the wrong season, still rooted in frost, while the world bursts into spring. The fringe tidbit? In some cases, former redcoats were offered land and incentives to start anew in remote parts of the British Empire, Nova Scotia, Jamaica, the Canadian frontier. Some took it. Others didn't trust another promise from a government that already abandoned them once. You consider it too, briefly. But you stay. Because there's one thing you're still hoping for: peace. Not the political kind, not a treaty or a headline or a declaration shouted from the steps of Parliament, the quiet kind. Peace in the chest, in the lungs, in the memory. But it's tricky. You walk through a market one day and hear a minstrel playing a tune from the colonies, a lilting fiddle, sharp and nostalgic. And suddenly, you're back in a burnt barn, holding a bayonet slick with something you don't want to name. Your tea spills. You don't apologize. Some nights you find yourself staring at the fire, imagining the war had gone differently, that the British won, that the Americans stayed under crown rule. Would anything have truly changed? Would you be any richer, any safer, any prouder? Or just older and carrying a different flavor of guilt? Historians still argue whether British victory would have preserved a more stable world order or merely prolonged inevitable fractures. But for you, the what-ifs never settle. They flutter like ash from a torch you couldn't put out in time. One day, a boy, maybe 8, maybe 9, asks you what it was like to fight George Washington. You pause, and instead of telling him about the disease, the starvation, the frostbite, the endless walking, the fear, you ruffle his hair and say, "Loud." He grins like you're a hero. It's the first time you've felt anything close to pride in years. But it doesn't last. You still dream of fields that aren't yours, of bugles echoing through fog, of flags rising only to fall again. You wake to find your sheets twisted like trenches. Still, the world moves on. The baker's daughter gets married, the barkeep retires. Someone paints over the graffiti on the old barracks wall. And one morning, you wake to a sky so blue it stings. No clouds, no smoke, just blue. You walk down to the cliffs and sit, legs dangling over centuries of rock. Below, the sea hums softly, steady, indifferent. And for the first time in a long while, you don't think about war. You just watch the waves. Let your breathing slow. Feel the wind press gently at your back. You lived through a history book no one wants to read all the way to the end. You stood on the wrong side of freedom, not because you were evil or cruel, but because you were born there, into duty, into orders, into red. You're not the villain. You're not the hero. You're the survivor. And maybe that's enough. Or maybe it has to be. Your joints ache more these days. A stiff shoulder from that old musket misfire. A knee that never quite healed after slipping on ice outside Trenton. You tell people it's just the weather, but deep down you know, it's the past. It's always been the past. Sometimes, walking through town, you catch yourself scanning rooftops, checking alley corners. Not for enemies anymore, just ghosts. You overhear the town crier mention George Washington again. President Washington now. Imagine that. The man who once ordered men to fire at you now governs a whole new nation. A nation that won. That didn't need you. You chew your bread a little harder that evening. History has a sense of irony. A wicked one. Here's your mainstream historical fact. By the late 1790s, many former redcoats found themselves politically irrelevant and socially invisible. Some ended up as laborers, others as vagabonds. Their service was often ignored, and their sacrifices forgotten. Empires don't keep thank you cards. One afternoon, you find a crumpled piece of parchment nailed to a tavern door. A call to arms. Not from Parliament, not from a crown, just a local dispute turned violent. You stare at it for a long time. You don't take it down. But you don't sign up either. It's not cowardice, it's clarity. You've bled once for a cause that wouldn't remember your name. You won't do it again. The fringe tidbit? Some disillusioned redcoats were rumored to have defected entirely, even moving to the newly formed United States after the war, assuming new identities. Some became farmers, cobblers, even patriots in their own right. A few, it's whispered, sent letters to Washington himself, apologies, confessions, requests for mercy. Most were never answered. You consider writing a letter, too. But what would you say? Dear sir, sorry for the bayonet. Doesn't quite cut it. Historians still argue whether Britain's defeat in the American Revolution ultimately made it stronger in the long run, less distracted, more focused on India and the rest of its empire. Maybe. But you don't feel stronger. You feel unfinished. There's no grand finale for you. No medal, no poem, no dramatic final stand. Just mornings and evenings, spoons and slippers, breath and time. But here's what no one tells you. Peace doesn't announce itself. It just happens. Quietly. On an ordinary Tuesday, you wake up and realize the fire in your chest has gone out, not smothered. Just cooled. You don't check the corners anymore. You don't grip your spoon like a trigger. You sit by the window and watch the street fill with children you'll never know. Speaking of things you'll never understand. They wear no colors. They fight no wars. Not yet, anyway. And you hope they never do. You used to wear red. Bright, defiant red. Now, your coat is gray. Wool. Plain. Softened by years. And honestly, it suits you. The war was long. The regrets, longer. But somehow, against all odds, you made it to the end of both. And now, as the sun dips low behind the chimney tops, your eyes grow heavy, not from pain, not from grief, but from rest, real rest. It's taken this long, but here it is. And now, as the final light fades behind the horizon of your memory, there's nothing left to do but let go. Let go of the uniform. Let go of the muskets and the flags. Let go of the endless roads and shouting captains and boots that never quite dried. Let go of the cold. Let your breath deepen. You're not a redcoat anymore. You're not even a soldier. You're just someone who was once young, once afraid, once convinced that marching in formation could make sense of the world. You did what you thought you had to do, and you lived long enough to wonder if that was ever enough. Now, your muscles loosen. The past untangles itself in your chest, thread by thread. The sounds of old battles fade into the distance like a tide pulling out to sea. No more gunpowder, no more drums, no more orders barked over wind and cannon, just silence. The soft silence of survival, the kind that holds no judgment, only rest. So wherever you are tonight, on a cot, on a couch, tucked into flannel sheets, or curled under a blanket on a hardwood floor, know that it's okay to close your eyes now. You've carried the weight long enough. You can put it down. The war is over, and your story, strange and unfinished as it may be, is safe now, folded away in history's quietest footnote. Sleep well, soldier. Sleep well.